Welcome back to the Anti-Meta Meta Club. This week's focus is Race B. It's a fun race with Group 3 cars, and that means that the Bape is actually pretty balanced, but I did find an anti-meta car. Let's get into it. Once again, your anti-meta car is the Corvette. Anytime the Supra or the Genesis are in the meta cars, which they are this week, you can pretty much guess that the Corvette is going to be a good anti-meta car because it's not quite as good as either of them, but it has massive amounts of power and can do a lot in slipstream. So it really is the anti-meta meta car. As of just about an hour ago, I was the fastest Corvette on the leaderboard, 33rd place overall, and the only car except for the 4C that isn't a Genesis or a Supra. I do fully expect there to be more Corvettes in the top 100 tomorrow and throughout the week, but it definitely is not quite as good as the Supra or the Genesis. As you can see, both of those cars are occupying the vast majority of the spots. As is frequently the case with Gran Turismo original tracks, the very first braking zone is really weird. Aiming for the 100 meter board, you're actually going to brake at the red part of the barrier before that. After braking, feel free to move onto the curb, but don't let your left tires get all the way up on the red and white part of the curb. You will start sliding. I actually started sliding a little bit here, and I had to downshift to first to get the car to rotate. You can do this cleaner by staying in second gear and staying off the white line and the curb entering the braking zone, but it's still pretty much the same line and you'd go about the same speed. Either way, a third gear exit is both safer and faster if done right. Hugging the right and hitting a late apex on this left-hander is really important to make sure you don't have to steer too much to avoid going in the grass. Looking for the 50 meter board that's hanging over the track right here, you're going to brake right as you get to it, immediately downshifting to third gear and trail braking in, trying to get yourself all the way up next to this curb without going all the way on top of it. Continue trail braking even past this apex and then squeeze on the throttle just a little bit as you add steering after coming off the brakes. You should be about in the middle of the track, and right at the end of the sand there on the right is when you want to brake and change direction. Dipping down to second can help the car rotate, but it isn't entirely necessary. You can also do this by staying in third gear. Just make sure you're patient enough, and when you add throttle, you don't get any under or oversteer. Just be very gentle on that throttle. Move to the right side of the track and start looking for this 50 meter board right here. You're not going to brake there, you're actually going to look for these lighter posts on the barrier, and at the second lighter post, that is when you're going to hit the brakes. In third gear, immediately start trail braking and turning in. You want to bleed off just enough speed so you can apex right before you get to these marshals and then get cleanly on the throttle. You'll notice that I apexed a little bit too early, so I had to blip the throttle real quick to get a little bit of rotation, and even though I did go in the grass just a little bit and I oversteered, I somehow didn't lose a lot of momentum. If you find yourself apexing earlier, you can also just choose to get on the throttle a little bit later or a little bit lighter. I chose the more aggressive approach just because I really like drifting, but honestly, it's not the safest. Looking for the 100 meter board that's hanging above the track, you're actually going to brake at this fence post on the barrier right before that. Downshift all the way to second gear, and when you get all the way past the 50 meter board, then you start gently turning in. As the car starts turning in more, you're going to continue keeping pressure on the brake until you apex at the stop sign. Get back on the throttle using all of this run out, being very careful not to spin the tires, and make sure you are in second gear. Third gear will be a little bit too slow here. These next couple curves, you pretty much just want to straight line it straight through. You don't need to go to the left side of the track until you're about to turn in for this next braking zone, and you want to turn in right at the sign on the left. Avoid touching the grass, but get as close as you possibly can, and then you can lift off the throttle to align yourself a little bit better for the braking zone. Brake at the end of this concrete runoff on the right, and then start turning in at the beginning of the blue and yellow barrier on the right. I want you to pay attention to the steering technique. You'll see I'm steering and lifting off the brakes here, but after I come off the brakes, I add a lot more steering before then adding throttle. This extra bit of rotation at the very end is what's going to allow you to get on the throttle really early, and of course you want to avoid the grass because you don't want dirty tires. Just like in the first corner, you can actually use the runoff after you've already started braking to give yourself a little bit more room. Brake right at the 100 meter board and then move all the way to the concrete runoff on the right. I want you to be very patient and look for this final set of trees here on the right. You don't want to start turning in until you're right there and in first gear. The stop sign is actually a really good place to try to apex. I hit it a little bit early, but that wasn't too bad. And of course, you've got to make sure that you use all this runoff to make sure you can get on the throttle early enough. There is one last corner, but you don't actually have to brake for it. The timing can be pretty tricky though. You're going to look for this gray part on the track and you're going to start turning in right there. Make sure you turn gradually because if you upset the balance of the car or if you just get understeer, you might not recover that grip and it could actually make you understeer all the way off the track. You definitely don't want that. From here, it's a straight shot to the end, and I should point out that you should pay attention to exactly when you should shift with this car because it is different than just revving it out. While we go through the lap, I'm going to mention a couple things that have changed just a little bit. It's always been kind of sketchy and a little bit weird braking on the curbs, and in fact, Dino and a lot of other people suggest not braking on the curbs whatsoever. It's a lot worse now. You used to be able to go all the way up on the blue, but now you can't without sliding, so definitely try to keep 2 of your tires on the asphalt. This sector is kind of interesting. If you sacrifice the beginning and get a good exit, you might just equalize the time where you had sacrificed the exit to carry a lot of speed in. It's really interesting that just the distance to this braking zone right here just seems to be exactly enough that you can take that corner in wildly different ways and end up at the next braking zone at exactly the same time. But you can use that to your advantage if you're trying to pass someone. If you know how someone's going to take it, like if they go in really hot and then exit pretty slow, then you can take advantage of that and get up next to them before the braking zone. But it's yours to play around with. I would suggest just trying to get in the middle of the track and sacrificing equally. Another thing that's really important to mention is that you used to be able to go, I think, even 3 tires off the track and you wouldn't get dirty tires, but then if you went 4 tires on the track, you'd automatically get super dirty tires. That seems to no longer be the case. It looks like if you put a tire off in the dirt, then that tire is going to be dirty. You can just get 1 tire dirty or 2 tires dirty, and that will definitely affect the grip. So you really want to avoid going in the grass as much as you possibly can, especially on a track like this that has really slow corners that really requires you to have a lot of grip and a lot of momentum coming out. Like I mentioned at the end of the breakdown, this car does have a different optimal shift point than just revving it out. So again, use manual. I know a number of you are expecting me to cover Race C this week, and I actually was prepared to do so, but after experimenting with literally every single car in the class, the 2016 cars that actually did race each other in real life are the only cars that are competitive against each other. With the NSX being the meta car, the GTR is slightly worse and the Lexus is slightly worse than that. Everything else is much, much worse and pretty much not worth using unless you're racing against people who are much slower than you, and that's not really fun for anyone. I generally find race B too short, and while I do still think this race is too short, it is actually a lot of fun. Group 3 is pretty well balanced, except for a couple meta cars, but because of that, we do have the anti-meta car, and like I said at the beginning of the video, the Corvette seems to really be the anti-meta meta car. The original idea I had was kind of just a play on words, but then I realized there might be a car that could defeat the meta car because of certain characteristics and strengths that it had. While the Corvette is definitely not as good as the Genesis or the Supra, it does have amazing power and amazing grip. So in the right circumstances, you can actually defeat the meta cars at their own game. Like many races, you've got to be really careful going into T1, and it's especially dangerous in Gran Turismo because Gran Turismo has really interesting collision physics. The cars, when they run into a car in front, will sometimes just completely stop, and no matter how much you're prepared to brake before that, there's pretty much nothing you can do. And so you can't really get mad at people for this. We're making mistakes, and it is a really casual race. So just try to be patient with people. You are going to get in incidents. Just try to be kind and try to be patient. Now, this race has no strategy in the traditional sense, but that doesn't mean there's no strategy involved in winning races. I talk about the importance of working with other drivers and developing relationships with other drivers that you race with frequently so you can use that to your advantage, and this right here is a prime example of it. We were too wide, actually 2 sets of cars too wide in that previous set of corners, and I gave Jimmy a bump because I was pretty sure of all of the 4 drivers that were involved in racing in that previous set of corners, I thought that Jimmy would be the fastest, and since I was directly behind him, I gave him a bump before we got into the braking zone to give him a definite advantage over the other driver. Now, the other driver is also a friend of mine. I wasn't trying to screw him over necessarily, but in the end, I'm trying to win myself. So if I can create a temporary alliance with one driver and then use that to my advantage, then that is all the strategy that I need. I've raced Jimmy a lot over the years, and I do trust him both pace-wise and to be clean when it comes to racing side by side. He and I actually have gotten into it a few times, but overall, I think we've had more clean races than we've had incidents, and so I did choose to give him lots of trust today, and I benefited from it greatly. Now, the Supra, of course, is the meta car, and it is behind another Corvette, our anti-meta car, which gave him a massive speed boost. So my goal right now is to try to actually get these two to fight so that I can take advantage of that, or maybe just use Jimmy's slipstream to then get in front of this Corvette. Positioning myself correctly allowed me to get next to him way earlier than I thought I would, and I was able to stay clean with him and he ended up just yielding the spot, I believe, to make sure that we didn't get into any kind of incidents. And now we're back at the last place where I was directly behind Jimmy. Now, since we got past that Corvette and there's no one else that could really give him any good slipstream, instead of working with him, I'm now going to try to pass him. As we know, the Supra is incredibly powerful, but this is the specific situation where I like using the Corvette. If I get a good exit and I have slipstream from a Supra, I can get all the way next to it going into the next braking zone. A lot of people don't think the Corvette has very good brakes, but I actually think that while it doesn't seem to have raw stopping power, its ability to trail brake into corners and continue decelerating as you turn in is really good. That specific ability is going to come in handy anytime you're trying to pull off any kind of pass. If you've driven the Supra, you probably know that it also handles better than the Corvette, but when you've got the power of slipstream in your hands, the dirty air, that kind of equalizes the handling capabilities of the two cars. So if you drive well enough, you drive clean enough, and you practice enough that you can drive the Corvette quickly, then even with the Supra on your tail, through all these really long sectors with full throttle, you can still stay in front of them. One lap after where we just were, the Porsche that was in front of us unfortunately spun, and it took us one more lap to get to the next Porsche. In any kind of race where top speed isn't quite important, the Porsche is pretty much going to be the meta car every single time. Anytime the Porsche can get slipstream from one of the really fast cars, it can usually keep up for the entirety of a straight, but it unfortunately was not the case right now, and this is why the Porsche didn't get to be anti-meta this time. The Corvette, despite the fact that the Porsche has slipstream from the Supra, is able to get all the way next to the Porsche with the Porsche's slipstream. And like I've been saying, the Corvette does have really good capabilities for trail braking, and as long as you spend enough time and get used to it, you can pull off passes like that too. Finding ourselves behind our friend Zwart, I'm going to show you exactly what it looks like when you're chasing down a Supra. You can tell that driver ability can definitely be different, but when it comes to the straights, I want you to see how quickly the Supra takes off on this next full throttle section. With that said, I think that Zwart also did a really good job on this corner. He kept up a lot of speed, he got on full throttle really early, and he didn't make any kind of mistakes, but you can see that the Supra is still completely pulling away from the Corvette. Despite the fact that I have slipstream, I had a pretty good exit, and I had slipstream this entire time, we haven't even cleared a single tenth staying within the slipstream, which definitely means that the Supra is incredibly overpowered. As you probably know, that isn't the longest straight though. So chasing him down through here, we can demonstrate the Corvette's ability to stay within slipstream and not have too much of an effect on the downforce when it comes to the dirty air. This left-hander is tricky enough by itself, and in the dirty air you can see that the Corvette still handles it like a champ. The fact that tire wear is not an issue in this race whatsoever also means that the Corvette doesn't really suffer from any kind of ill effects by the end of the race. You don't have to really worry about the tires whatsoever. If this were a tire wear race, it would be a different story. Now, this is the last lap, and we don't have another braking zone to go into, but it does look like I'd at the very least be able to challenge our friend Zwart, especially if I didn't touch the grass right there. But since we didn't have another lap, our friend Zwart got to stay in 5th place, and I got to take home P-Steve, which honestly might be even better than a win. We talked about the little micro strategies that you can employ in the middle of the race, but since there's no actual strategy, all you really have to worry about is setting your lap, getting really used to your lap, making it kind of like second nature, and then of course figuring out how the dirty air and the fuel weight is going to change the characteristics of the car. Besides that, it's just a sprint. Have fun. Thank you for watching my video. If you liked what you saw, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And of course, I'll be back next week with another one of these guides. In the meantime, I'm going to leave you with a look at my current members. Thank you guys. I love every single one of you.